the street, and this is one of our very largest packings ever. We're packing bags of hope, which are food backpacks for kids that would otherwise go hungry on weekends. 1 in 4 Arizona children struggles with food insecurity. That's 25% of our population. Upwards of 500,000 kids aren't sure where their next meal is going to come from. He looked down at his dinner plate and let tears roll down his face. Really, he cried at our dinner table. And he said, I watched her walk right up to a big black trash can, reach in. He said she pulled out a piece of pizza, and I can see some faces, some mom faces. That was probably what mine looked like that night. I thought, how could this be happening in my city and I don't know it? That night, my husband said, all right, we have a hunger problem in our city. I think we should start a nonprofit to help these kids. I think we should call a kitchen on the street, and I think we should do it tonight. Our first year, we partnered with one school, and now we serve 2,000 kids, so we pack about 6,000 bags a month. It's incredible. We moved from our kitchen table to our backyard, to a schoolroom, then to a warehouse. We're making a huge difference academically in the classroom, and I have to believe that just by a healthier life and better education, then they're going to be a success outside the classroom too. During the course of our 5-year partnership with Duke and Live Well, that's equated to 210,000 meals for hungry kids, and make it possible for thousands of children to know they're going to eat this weekend. And to them, that truly turns hunger into hope.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for a brief period of time together to talk about working with military families. I'm really looking forward to this conversation and sincerely appreciate your time. My name is Kate Hendricks Thomas. I'm a professor of public health down in Charleston, South Carolina, and a lot of my work is related to service members, veterans, and their families. And I really tend to take an asset-based approach, and that's what I'm going to ask us to do today. A lot of the reason for that is that I grew up in a military family. I was in the service myself, and for a period of time, I was a military spouse. So experientially, I've always felt that it's important to focus on strengths-based approaches, and all of my research the last decade has shown that if you want to work with the military-connected community in culturally competent fashion, it's really helpful to take this sort of approach. A lot of the time when we talk about military families, we focus on risk factors, we focus on problem prevalence, and it would be irresponsible not to think about these things, not to talk about these things, not to understand rates of injury, rates of mental health, really understand that there are risks for this population. So we'll briefly touch on that today with the understanding that when you're working within this community, you never want to lead with a problem focus. So as everyone who's opted to take this webinar probably knows, we have been at war for the last 15 years, and the all-volunteer force has been extremely busy and reported a higher operational tempo than in previous decades. There are over 2 million children in the United States who have a parent that has been deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. The lengths of these deployments vary, but the average is typically a year. It depends on the service branch and kind of the need. But what's interesting about deployment is with over 84,000 dual career military couples, the implementation of what we call family care plans and the rates of parents being deployed at the same time has been a lot higher over the last 15 years than we've seen in the past. So military families have had to do things like say goodbye to mom and dad at the same time and allow interim caregivers to come in and take over the parenting responsibilities that are now being passed off. Deployment carries with it significant risk. There are over 52,000 service members that have been wounded since 9/11, and that's just physical wounds. The rates of invisible injuries are significantly higher. We've got a predictive range for stress injury that's anywhere from 15 to 50% post-deployment. There are over 320,000 that have suffered concussive blasts, what we call traumatic brain injuries. And these often co-occur with stress injury, depression, and other comorbidities, other pain-related issues. So there are a lot of risks for service members who are deploying, and when they come back having suffered a visible or invisible wound, a lot of times family members get thrust into the caregiving role. And there are over 5.5 million military caregivers. And what I mean by this is relatives who are caring for wounded service members or veterans. About a fifth of these are military connected themselves. They are veterans themselves. And there are tremendous burdens on caregivers while their partner isn't in the same employment or even physical state that they were before they left. There are now new roles, new responsibilities, and potential co-occurring mental health conditions that the caregiver gets faced with. Military children tend to be fast movers, really. Even when we're not talking about deployment, the military family moves every 2 to 3 years, and that's 3 times as frequently as the civilian family. So what that means for military children is constant school change, and not just school change, but region and state competency changes. The average military child changes schools 6 to 9 times. I know growing up as a military dependent, I went to 3 high schools in 3 states in the 4 years I spent in high school. And every single time there was competency level and cultural kind of shock that went along with that change. So we know that military life can be difficult for service members, for their children, for their partners who may even become caregivers, for dual military couples, but they're incredibly proud. This community is incredibly proud of their service. And military children are actually twice as likely as civilian children to join the military themselves. So when we want to work with the military family, we want to come in really focusing carefully on our language and programming to work with military families should be theoretically grounded. And one of the best theories I know of to work with this community is resiliency theory. Resiliency theory is several decades old, and it was developed in the field of social work. Initially, the first wave studied children who really shouldn't be employed and successfully partnered. So children who had rough upbringings, lots of adverse childhood experiences. Researchers went in and studied these kids. About a third of them would grow up with abusive backgrounds and abandonment heavy backgrounds, and about a third of them would grow up to be traditionally and conventionally successful. So what researchers in the first wave of resiliency theory study were interested in was this question of what are these kids, what's common to these kids? Why are they making it when they really shouldn't? And what they found were common resilient traits in this 1/3 of the population that's naturally resilient come what may. Second wave resiliency theory focused heavily on, all right, we know what resilient traits are. Can we help people grow their resilience? Can we train for resilience? And the research indicated that yes, we can. Third wave resiliency broadens that focus even further, looking at can we train entire communities to be resilient? And again, the data indicate that we can. And what we have to do is focus on 3 umbrella concepts, and resilient traits fall under these umbrella concepts. The first being the bedrock of socially supportive relationships. So having buttresses is incredibly important to being a resilient individual or being a member of a resilient community. The second is self-care and self-regulatory endeavors. So here, if what you think when I say self-care is going to the spa, not quite that direction. What we're talking about here are positive health behaviors, and we're talking about specific regulation of the nervous system to really promote well-being. And we'll talk a little bit more in detail about how you can operationalize this in a program or with a coaching or therapy client. And the last bullet is an interesting one. And here it's spiritual practice. So whether you approach it from a secular standpoint and you're talking about spiritual practices like the practice of gratitude that make people resilient, or you come at it from a religious perspective and you focus on subjective religiosity and the way that offers protective effect to individuals, understanding that spiritual fitness makes a person more resilient is really useful when taking an asset-based approach to programming. So we focus a lot in public health and in social work on protective effects. And I've been so fortunate to work with community partners to offer programs for military families, for military couples, for service members, and for veterans that really try to teach cultivation of social support, the implementation of positive behavioral health practices, and kind of the exploration of spiritual practices. And I'd like to share a little bit of that work with you briefly, so you can get an understanding of what a program grounded in resiliency theory might look like.
When I came back from Afghanistan, I spent 7 years in what I call a dark place, because all there was anger and depression.
Not until I got home, and I would be very angry, very, very angry. And I would cry for like no reason.
And when I got out, I started going through a divorce, and my drinking just skyrocketed.
The Resilient Leadership Retreat is intended for military veterans who are interested in bringing their best selves to each and every day. This Resilient Leadership Retreat is all about trying to boil down this big concept of resilience and teaching it through self-care practices, building social support, and cultivating spiritual practices. We learned some specific self-care techniques. So how do I treat my body well? How do I understand my stress? And then we spent some time on spiritual practice and asking ourselves a few questions about how we're doing things and what we're giving time and focus towards.
I just thought, yeah, I don't need that stuff. There's people in worse shape than me that need that. But as time's gone on, I found out, I need this just as bad as anybody else.
Family, very supportive, because they saw that something was wrong and I wasn't St. Angela. So they encouraged me to get help. You have to have a breakdown to have a breakthrough. Okay, and so that's what happened to me. I didn't want to feel weak, I guess. I thought I was being tough by like holding it all in and not going to talk to anybody, but that in itself can be weakness. We all need help in that we all need that support. And even when we know things, we need the reminders, and we need the encouragement to tweak our path as we go. So over the course of 3 days together, we really work on understanding the importance of social support, figuring out how to cultivate a healthy tribe.
These are veterans, and they get it. They've been there, they've done that. And, it kind of took me a little bit to put my guard down, but once I did, I started having fun and meeting new people. And I think all together it was very beneficial.
The thing about this environment is no matter what you're going through, there's somebody somewhere here who's gone through the same thing. It's just like, wow, I'm not going through this alone.
I've been to 4 sessions of yoga now, different aspects of it, and I leave it feeling healthy, feeling peaceful, and feeling content with myself.
One of the pieces that they put in was about social connection, and I don't connect socially, so that piece kind of hits home.
When you have something like this, it's giving us the tools where we can fix things before it becomes a problem. I kind of compare it to preventive medicine to like surgery. This is like that preventive medicine.
I can absolutely say that it does resonate. It is useful. It's been demonstrated in multiple populations all over the country.
It's definitely brought my old self back, and it helps me be able to reach out to other people or try new things or just kind of face my fears and find my identity again.
I leave with a better understanding, but I leave with an internal comfortability that I don't have in life. We have been through hell, and we need whatever help we can get.
I'm 26 years old, and I know several other vets who have gone to programs like this, and they love it. It's very helpful. They learn a lot, and it's very beneficial altogether.
I just feel so fortunate and so grateful to be a part of this, where specific people show up fully while they're here, and that they take a pause in their regular lives to take 3 days to do something like this and invest in themselves, knowing that it's helping them invest in their relationships and their leadership and their resilience. It takes a lot to get here, and so yeah, I just love it.
It's a beautiful program, beautiful people running it. I always say never say no to yourself. So say yes to it. Why not? What do you have to lose?
So what you notice in that program overview video is an emphasis on performance enhancement rather than treatment. And this is what you really want to focus on when you're working with military families. You can actually ameliorate symptoms of stress injury, stressors that families are facing from multiple relocations, some of the spousal underemployment and unemployment issues that military families face. You can ameliorate all of that with programs grounded in resiliency theory, but your language is asset-based, and as a result, your participation is going to increase, and the receptivity that you'll get from a client when you paradigmatically shift your language towards a more positive, growth-oriented, strengths-based direction is really powerful. And it's exciting to work with families and emphasize, okay, how are we going, what are the tactics, techniques, and procedures that we're going to use to improve our social support, not just within our own little bubble, but outside of our existing network? How are we going to make sure that we have those positive accountability partners? How are we going to think about self-care? So again, you don't want to take the spa massage therapy mindset. This is a community that likes to train, that likes to work. A lot of the programming that I've done has used CrossFit or yoga or outdoor adventure. I'm working on one right now because we're in the Low Country in South Carolina that focuses on sea kayaking because we have that available to us. So what that does is it draws our military families in, and we're going to be teaching all of the mental health promotion stuff that you would want to do with a community that faces a lot of very real stresses, but we're not using that language. What we're talking about is learning a new skill and working together as a cohort to get good on open water. And you'd be really surprised at how receptive your clients and your program participants will be when you really shift the paradigm. So teaching spiritual fitness is interesting, and it's definitely something that is audience and setting specific. So you want to know if you're coming in and you're going to take a secular perspective. And here you're going to talk about the top level of the Maslow hierarchy, that human need for transcendence. And we can talk here in language that works with military families about purposeful service. So how are we giving back to our community? How are we connecting outside of our own home? Civic engagement is something that the military family is very comfortable with, and it can be incredibly healthy, right? Volunteer work and purposeful service offers protective effect against mental health problems. So it's powerful, and you don't have to talk about it from a religious perspective. If you're in a setting where participants are open to that and you've been asked to take that approach, I often talk about the science of subjective religiosity, and what it does for human health is incredibly powerful. There are great research institutes at Yale and at Duke that are studying the link between faith and human health, and it's an undeniable link. So if your community, if your client or your program is open to talking about connecting outside of self from a religious perspective, you can find some great resources both at Duke and at Yale that I highly recommend. Designing programming and designing coaching or therapy sessions for military families requires more than just learning a little bit about Iraq and Afghanistan and a few acronyms. So if you want to study resilience a little bit more deeply, there's so many great resources about resilient leadership. And I like to talk about resilience in performance enhancement language. The military family is often really excited about learning how to be better leaders, how to be more engaged. So the top bullet on this slide might be useful to you. If you're not too sure how to incorporate holistic health, balanced wellness, nervous system regulation techniques, you might be interested in the second bullet. I also gave I gave a talk recently for TED in Columbia, South Carolina, that talks about how we can create and build mental fitness by purposefully taking ourselves down to theta state, which is that it's a very specific brain wave where a lot of exciting growth happens. So twice a day, 3 minutes a day, and you can rewire your brain. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about self-care. So there are a lot of great resources where you can learn more about how to weave that into sessions with clients, or how to weave that into programming that you're designing. It's incredibly important to emphasize community building. And it's something that the military family gets. It's a transient population that's used to saying goodbye to people. So how can you teach the military families with whom you're working, how can you teach them to cultivate healthy social support from day one in a new place? How can you help them with goal setting along those lines to maintain important ties across distance and find new ones in new locations? And then for a lot of social workers and health professionals, this notion of spiritual fitness, which chaplains tend to be very good at, this notion might be new to you. So this fourth bullet here talks about the science of spiritual fitness and how we can approach this with military families in settings both secular and religious. I've written a fair amount about this topic, and you can actually pick up Brave, Strong, True if you're interested in how to operationalize an asset-based approach, or how to make sure your language is culturally competent. This might be something, it's a quick and painless read, definitely not written in terribly academic language. This might be something that interests you. I think sometimes a little bit of storytelling can go a long way.
Join Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas on a journey of discovery in her powerful new book, Brave, Strong, and True: The Modern Warrior's Battle for Balance. With a unique blend of personal narrative and current research, This Marine turned PhD challenges the way we think about health and resilience, exploring these questions. What if we could train America's service members to succeed in mental battles as we do in physical ones? And what if you could train yourself to be ready for adversity? Learn the skills you need to meet each challenge with strength. Cultivate the confidence to become a better parent, professional, or friend, and bring your best self to each day. Brave, Strong, True. Available now at bravestrongtrue.com.
So I'm incredibly passionate about outreach to service members, veterans, and military families that focuses on mental fitness training and the cultivation of resilience. And what I found in doing this work is that if you don't use that language, if you take a problem-based approach, there are far too many folks in this community that you're just never going to reach. So I'd really love to continue this conversation. If you have specific questions about working with clients or designing programs, you can find me through my website at drkatethomas.com. I'd be really interested in continuing the conversation.
Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas, Assistant Professor of Health Promotion at Charleston Southern University, a U.S. Marine Corps veteran, a speaker and the co-founder of Just Roll With It Wellness.
Joining me now is Kate Hendricks Thomas, board member of the Service Women's Action Network.
Welcome to this week's edition of the Excellence in Training Academy Dose of Leadership podcast.
Life in Focus.
The Patriot and the Preacher, and joining us today,
Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas.
Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas.
She's a researcher,
An author.
a yoga instructor. She loves working with military veterans.
After I left the active duty Marine Corps, I was struggling through a badly done reintegration process. I didn't understand how tightly I was wound. I didn't understand why I was angry. We have a really tough time with leaving the active component and navigating transition stress. We're interested in building resilience and promoting healing for everybody. We have some serious cultural stigma issues. I like to say you can keep your couch. And that's how a lot of our service members who are suffering feel. I never wanted to be looked at as any different than any other Marine officer, and I hated anything that sounded like a victim narrative. Today, I'm a health researcher, and I focus a lot of the time on trying to make the transition back to civilian life easier for military women. I work with veteran reintegration, and my women veterans always have a tougher time re-entering the civilian world. For female service members specifically, there are issues with social support and unit cohesion. We need a socially cohesive foundation. We have to be talking about targeting our behavioral health interventions. And that's the question of mental fitness and mental health as a readiness issue. Resilient traits are those traits that allow you to take a punch in the teeth, allow you to weather stress. And those can be trained, cultivated, and tested for. Mental fitness training can be assessed in the same scalable way that we assess physical fitness training. Really, it's learning about managing your own stress response, and that can do so much. I talk about 3 umbrella concepts that do improve resilience. If you are practicing social support, self-care, and spirituality, you are better able to handle that adverse life experience. Our major problem with veterans coming back with post-traumatic stress is that sometimes they're coming back into a community that starts to feel foreign. Reintegrating into the civilian world can be difficult, and creating a space for veterans to socialize with both civilian community members and one another is a good and a healthy thing. Social activity and community building.
Army combat veteran Noah Galloway. With Noah, Kate Hendricks, they are working to pay it forward.
It's really important to us to surround ourselves with positive buoys, people who are committed, who value the same things that you do. That gets you started on a path of growth, and it keeps you there. People with high levels of social support very rarely suffer these negative mental health outcomes.
Nothing has more protective effect than a high level of what we call subjective religiosity, meaning you believe in a higher power and you have practices associated with that belief that you do in community with others.
I had brushed aside spiritual concerns. It was something that was easy to set aside, but it's at the center of our health. Humans need purpose, they need connection, they need to ask the big questions, and to embrace your own definition of spirituality is really important. For me, the hard part was share the truth about how I learned some of that. And a lot of the truth there is I'm a stove toucher. I made a great many mistakes. I felt like I had to seem very infallible and I had to seem very all-knowing.
Veterans are resilient leaders. Veterans don't need, want, or have any interest in a brokenness narrative. That's not who we are. That's not who we're going to be in the future.
I find the notion that resilience can be trained and taught and tested for, I find that incredibly empowering. All of the things that make us better warriors also make us better parents, better partners, better friends. I mean, it really translates in every area of a person's life. It's an honor, it's an absolute honor to share that.